talking about the constraints and tactical periodization, I call it a bit of the Netflix paradox. You know, I don't know if it has happened to you, but it happens to me sometimes if I feel like watching something, but I don't know what, and I go to Netflix, and sometimes it's even worse if it's my girlfriend doing it. But it's like you have so much choice, so much you can do. If I can tell you like, oh, you can do anything, you can choose anything. It's a bit what it's called an paralysis by analysis. You know, you can do so many things that you get stuck because you're not able to choose. And this is where I think that tactical periodization is actually a good match for creative behavior, because it doesn't tell you how you need to behave, but it kind of frames you. You have a starting point. You have this kind of shared mental model. You have this, you know, this kind of underpinning or overarching idea that guides you. You can create, like what I think you've heard this before, you know, you can be free to act without acting freely. It's one of my favorite sentences of Professor Frade. You know, it's really about being novel but being adequate. So the adequateness can be judged here. For example, you can assess creativity within tactical periodization, but what will matter for you as a coach when you are measuring that or when you are evaluating that creativity is actually if it makes sense in terms of what is the intention of what you are trying to achieve. Is not just creativity for the sake of creativity, is creativity with a purpose, like Nuno was saying. And that for me is one of the key messages in terms of creativity in sport. It's not that just being creative for the sake of creativity, being able to do 300 different dribbles or flicks or whatever. Don't get me wrong, it's good to have options and it's good to explore those options, but it's easier to explore options when you have a bit of a constraint. And this is something that's a professor in Barcelona. Her name is Carlota Torrents. She talks about something called the motor creativity paradox. So I would argue, like Rui Faria does, that actually thinking inside the box is not a bad thing. So thinking inside the box can have some power. If you think of the game idea, you know, this kind of shared mental model as the box, then you are free to create within that box, because as Rui says, and in my opinion, if there's not this shared mental model guiding us, this previous intention, we might end up actually, instead of unbalancing the opponent, we might end up unbalancing our own team, and that might be a bit counterproductive. James Vaughan, or Jimmy Vaughan as he's more known, he has something called the PDP project, or Play Development Project, with quite a lot of interesting stuff. And I would say I'm very much aligned with him in terms of research. So what is creativity? Most of you said it's an ability. It's almost like an individual ability. So I would argue, and hopefully by now you can understand, not that you need to agree with me, but you can understand where I'm coming from, that creative moments are not something that is only about individual, like the individual has this creativity within himself, but it's also influenced by how the environment allows him to express that potential. I'm not saying there's no such thing as creative potential, but the environment, this link between the environment and the athlete, it's really important for creativity to become, for the previous intention to become an intention in act or in action. So stuff like the weather, for example, I put there a beautiful image of Scottish football that summarizes it well, you know, like stuff like the weather conditions or the weather, like the constraints like the weather can limit, and other constraints like, for example, who are your teammates and how they think and what they are able to do. And I'm sure all of us who like football miss just looking at this Barcelona team. It's just incredible. So depending on who your teammates are, you might also be more or less able to express your creativity. And you might have heard of this gentleman here, someone I really admire as well. And he was a coach before. He's now a sporting director, and he talks about something called the puzzle theory, which I think fits a lot with the idea of creativity underpinned by the tactical periodization methodology or philosophy. You know, you see, he assesses the quality of players. He measures or he evaluates the quality of players, but he does it based on, for example, he has this team of scouts, but they all have this shared mental model. They are looking for something to fit into what he calls the puzzle. You know, it's about understanding if a player is the correct piece of the puzzle, and understanding if it fits the reality or the specificities of the club. And I think this fits really nicely with creativity. So yeah, decided to put it here. This is a very recent model, and it's another parallel that I'm going to be establishing with tactical periodization and with creativity. You know, this Danish professor Henriksen, he has published this model that is now being widely adopted in research, and he has a lot of links with something called the Team Denmark, which is the structure that looks after the national teams, the Danish national teams across different sports. So he's saying now, yeah, the context is really important, and we need to start looking not only in terms of what happens on the pitch, but what actually happens outside of the pitch. There are all these influences in what we call the talent development environment. All these things affect talent development. You know, things like who are your teammates, what is the sport culture in the country, the educational system, the family, the media. And you know, if you are already thinking a little bit along the lines of tactical periodization, this will be nothing new for you. But this is actually something that is becoming quite trendy in terms of research. And actually, James Vaughan, who does the research on creativity in football as well, and who has done some work with the Barcelona Foundation, the Barça Innovation Hub, and he is now the kind of head of the academy or something like that in AIK Stockholm. Interesting guy for you to follow. So it's really interesting to see now that there's many things that you need to account for, and research is actually going in this direction.